Leonardo Grassi walked into the lantern room on a Tuesday evening, set a leather folder on my bar, and offered to buy my building for more money than this old supper club had earned in 10 years. When I said no, he studied me for a long moment and said that perhaps, Mrs. Reed, you and I will simply have to become partners. I looked the most feared man in New Haven straight in the eye. I buried one husband already, I told him. I'm not volunteering for another. And Leonardo Grassi did something no one in that dining room had seen him do in 20 years. He smiled. Not a threat wearing a smile's clothing, not a banker's courtesy. A real smile, slow and surprised, as if I had handed him something his money had never once been able to purchase. His lieutenant went stiff beside him. Somewhere behind me, Ruth dropped a glass, and I stood behind my own bar, wondering why a man like that wanted my building so badly, and what I had just encouraged. You should understand what he was trying to buy. The Lantern Room has stood on the same corner in New Haven for 60 years, through presidents and hurricanes and every fashion that tried to kill it. Red leather booths worn soft by 3 generations of elbows. Brass rails polished by 60 years of wedding anniversaries. A dance floor no bigger than a good kitchen, where retired couples still dance like the world is watching, and like nobody is. It is a second home to people the world has started to overlook. Long-time workers who eat at the same table every Thursday. Aging musicians who still play on Fridays because our stage remembers their names. And Ruth Delaney, my floor manager, 67 years old, 32 of them spent inside these walls. Ruth knows every regular's order, every anniversary, every grief. She also knew my late husband longer than she has known me, and she loves him still. Peter Reed died 2 years ago, suddenly and naturally, his heart simply stopping between one ordinary hour and the next. He was 43. We had been married 10 years, and this town had long since decided we were its favorite love story. His photograph hangs by the bar, and whenever a customer calls him my great love, I smile and say only that Peter was a good man. That part is true. I have just never once said the rest. Upstairs, past the storage landing, there is a small office that was Peter's alone. I have not opened that door in 2 years. The old brass key rides on my key ring every single day, heavier than its weight, and I change the subject whenever anyone mentions our wedding anniversary. Ruth assumes grief. The town assumes devotion. I let them, because the truth inside that room belongs to me, and I was not ready to pay for it. Now, about the man at my bar. Leonardo Grassi is 53 years old and runs Grassi Hospitality, a hotel group with marble lobbies up and down the corridor between here and New York. He is also, depending on who is talking and how quietly, the head of a family whose name makes grown men check the exits. He could have sent lawyers for my building. Men like him always send lawyers. Instead, he came himself, with 1 lieutenant and no entourage. The folder held a serious offer. Above market value, my staff guaranteed their jobs for a year. Even a line promising the name over the door would survive the sale. It was Rocco Belandi, his acquisition man, informed me, more than fair. And it was. That is what frightened me. Unfair offers are easy to refuse. Fair ones make you look at everything you are about to lose and admit, out loud, that none of it has a price. Because that is what selling means. The Lantern Room would keep its name the way a photograph keeps a person. The musicians would be politely scheduled out. The Thursday tables would become hotel guests in a hurry. My people would become a concept. So I slid the folder back across the bar and told Mr. Grassi that my answer was no, today and next month, and however long he planned to keep asking. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice, or mention his reputation, or say anything about everyone having a price. He simply nodded once, like a man filing away an interesting fact, and told me he would see me the following Tuesday. Rocco laughed at that, a short, disbelieving sound. Leonardo did not laugh. That should have been my first warning, and deep down, I think I already knew it. He came back the next Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that. Every week a new structure, each one more inventive than the last. A purchase with a lifetime management contract for me, a sale leaseback that let me keep the keys, a trust arrangement I needed Ruth and a pot of coffee to decode. Never a threat, never pressure you could point to, just a patient, relentless courtship of my building, conducted at my bar between the lunch rush and the first seating. Somewhere in those weeks, things shifted. He started arriving before I expected him and staying through the early crowd. He learned that Mr. Kowalski takes his Manhattan with 2 cherries and that the DeLuca sisters will not sit near the speakers. He remembered birthdays. He held doors for women half his height. The regulars began nodding at him, and in my dining room, a nod from my regulars is harder to earn than a liquor license. Ruth watched all of it the way she watches a storm coming up the coast. One night after closing, she stacked glasses beside me and said, "That man looks at this place like it is a puzzle he cannot buy the answer to." I told her he would get bored. Rich men always get bored. Ruth dried her hands, looked at me for a beat too long, and said she was not sure the building was the puzzle anymore. That October, the Ladies' Auxiliary proposed a memorial dinner on what would have been our 11th wedding anniversary. His favorite meal on the menu, they said. A toast at his table. I listened to the whole kind plan, and then I said the club was booked that night, which it was not, and suggested we honor Peter at Christmas instead, which we never did. Ruth watched me dismantle their kindness and said nothing, but later I caught her looking at the photograph by the bar, and she looked puzzled. Fridays belong to the dancers. That has been true since before I ever worked here, and it will be true after I am gone. We push the tables back, the old band sets up, and by 8 o'clock the floor is full of people in their 70s and 80s, moving with a grace the young never believe in. It is the heart of this place. Even Peter used to say, "If Fridays die, the Lantern Room is just a restaurant." One Friday in early November, I went looking for a case of wine and found Leonardo Grassi hiding in my kitchen, not meeting anyone, not inspecting anything. Hiding. He stood between the walk-in and the dish pit in a suit that cost more than my stove, listening to the band through the wall like a man pinned down by gunfire. It took me exactly one look to understand. The band had just started a swing number, and the man could not dance. I leaned against the doorframe and asked if the great Leonardo Grassi had finally found the one opponent he could not intimidate. He said, with perfect seriousness, that he did not see the point of an activity whose entire purpose was public embarrassment. I told him the point was joy, and that my 80-year-old regulars had more courage on their worst night than he had in his expensive suit. He did not argue. He just watched the door like a border he had no papers to cross. I left him there. A man deserves to lose one small battle in private. But in the weeks after, he began asking casual questions that were not casual. How long had the same band been playing? Which steps the regulars learned first? Whether a person could practice without an audience. I answered, and thought nothing of it. I should have known. Men like Leonardo do not ask questions for conversation. Behind the bar sits an espresso machine older than most of my staff, a heavy brass and chrome beast Peter rebuilt with his own hands the year we married. It leaks steam, it screams like a kettle, and the espresso it produces is, I will admit only here, terrible. But it was Peter's. Every morning I heat it up out of loyalty, and every morning my regulars order it out of loyalty, and we all quietly add more sugar. Leonardo took one sip of that espresso in his 3rd week and set the cup down like it had confessed to something. He told me, in the flat voice of a man who owns hotel kitchens, that the machine was beyond its useful life, and he would have a proper Italian one delivered by Friday. No charge. Consider it a courtesy between neighbors. I looked at him and said, "You touch that machine, and you will learn what a real no sounds like." He did not understand. Why would he? In his world, broken things get replaced, and the bill proves you care. I tried to explain that Peter had taken that machine apart, piece by piece, on this very bar, that half the regulars had watched him do it, that replacing it would be like replacing the man. Leonardo listened without blinking, and said only, "Preservation and function are not enemies." I told him that sounded like a hotel brochure. 2 weeks later, I came in at 6 on a Monday morning and found him at the bar in his shirt sleeves, tools laid out on a bar towel like a surgeon's instruments. He had tracked down the original manufacturer in Milan. He had found a retired repairman in Hartford who still knew the model. He had spent 2 weekends learning its temperament. He looked up, unembarrassed, and said the boiler gasket had perished and the pressure valve was a lie. Then he went back to work. By 9 o'clock, that machine pulled the first honest espresso of its long life, and Ruth cried into her apron and pretended it was allergies. I stood there watching a feared man tighten a brass fitting with more care than most people hold a baby, and I understood something that unsettled me deeply. He had not tried to buy the thing I loved. He had learned how to keep it alive. That is a completely different kind of man. One evening, over the last of that first honest espresso, we got to talking about the old supper clubs that had closed up and down the coast. Leonardo called it failure of adaptation. I surprised myself by disagreeing. Some of them were loved right to the end, I said. A thing can matter deeply and still be finished. He turned that over slowly and said he was not sure he believed anything finished could still matter. I remember thinking, you have no idea what I am really talking about. Now, if you have ever watched someone prove themselves in a small thing before the big ones, you know exactly why my hands were shaking. Take 1 second and tap like and subscribe, because stories like this one deserve to find people who still believe character shows up quietly. What happened next nearly cost me everything I owned, and I would hate for you to miss how it turns out. Here is what I had told no one, not even Ruth. 5 years before he died, Peter refinanced this building to cover renovations, and the loan was the kind that stays friendly, right up until the end. A balloon payment. The club was current on every monthly bill, but the final lump sum was coming due in the spring, and it was more money than the lantern room could produce without gutting payroll, skipping repairs, and praying nothing broke. I had been carrying that date the way you carry a cracked rib, careful, quiet, and in pain when I laughed. Some weeks I paid the linen service before myself. I stopped ordering the good bourbon. Ruth noticed the small economies and said nothing, which told me she had noticed everything. I was not sinking, but I was standing in water that was rising by exactly 1 inch a month, and spring was coming. I never told Leonardo. It turns out I did not have to. Men who acquire buildings for a living can smell a balloon payment the way sharks smell blood, and his people did what his people do. One Tuesday he set down his folder and said, quietly and without any triumph, that he knew about the loan. He was not offering to fix it. He was telling me the ground under our negotiations had changed, and he thought I deserved to know he knew. What I did not know was that a third man had already smelled it too. Harlan Voss was a real estate investor, 59 years old, with soft hands and a hard little smile, and he made Leonardo a proposal so clean it was almost elegant. Voss would quietly buy up my mortgage note from the bank. When the balloon came due, he would refuse any extension. I would default, the building would go to auction, and Voss would hand it to Grassi Hospitality at a friendlier price. It was legal, it was simple. It required Leonardo to do absolutely nothing except wait for me to drown. Rocco was in favor of it, which he admitted to me later with the bewildered honesty of a man reporting a solar eclipse. Because Leonardo looked at the easiest victory of his career and said no. He told Voss the arrangement was over before it began, and then he told his own people that my mortgage was not leverage. It was my life, and it was off the table. I heard about it from Rocco, of all people, weeks later, when he could no longer keep the confusion inside him. You know what you cost him, he said, and it was not an accusation. It was a genuine question from a man who had watched his boss refuse a winning hand. I did not have an answer for Rocco. I barely had one for myself, because that was the week I stopped being able to call Leonardo Grassi my enemy. The next Tuesday, I asked him straight out why he had refused Voss. He considered the question seriously, the way he considered everything, and said, "Because a victory taken from a drowning person is not a victory. It is salvage." I said, "Most men in his position would call that business." He said those men were exactly why he no longer wanted to be in it alone. Then he changed the subject to the machine's pressure gauge, and I let him, because some confessions need a little room around them. I want to be honest with you about what I felt, because it was not gratitude. It was worse. It was hope, and hope is a dangerous tenant in a building like mine. A hopeful woman starts imagining a future, and I had locked my future in an upstairs room 2 years earlier. So I did what I always did when feelings got expensive. I polished the bar and changed the subject. The next Tuesday, Leonardo came without the folder. Instead, he brought a single document, 10 pages, no marble lobby photographs, no grand promises. A joint operating agreement. I would keep the building, the name, the staff, the management, every Friday night tradition, down to the last waltz. His hotel, rising next door, would send us guests and overflow events, and we would share the revenue from everything his people booked into my dining room. Transparent books, audited by a firm we both chose, defined revenue shares, written in plain English. A clause that neither side could ever use my mortgage as collateral for the other's obligations. He had built, as far as my lawyer could later find, a partnership with no trapdoor in it. It solved my balloon payment without selling a single brick. It saved my staff and my Fridays and Peter's name over the door. And I could not say yes. I sat at my own bar with the answer to every problem I had been praying about, and my hands would not pick up the pen. Leonardo watched me the way he had watched me refuse money, refuse pressure, refuse everything, and for the first time he looked genuinely uncertain. "Tell me what to change," he said, and I could not tell him, because the thing that needed changing was not in the document. It was in the room upstairs. So let me ask you, before this story goes any further, because I have wondered about it every day since. If someone handed you everything you said you wanted, and your heart still would not let you reach for it, would you call that wisdom or fear? Tell me in the comments, because I chose wrong about myself for 2 whole years, and some of you have already guessed what I was hiding. The agreement needed final property documentation, surveys and records, and the ordinary archaeology of an old building. That brought everything back to the upstairs office, where Peter's business papers still sat exactly as he left them. I told Leonardo, quickly and too firmly, that nothing in that room affected ownership, and the paperwork could be reconstructed from the bank and the lawyer. He looked at me for a long moment, then he said the documentation could wait, and he never asked about that room again. You have to understand what that cost him. This was a man who eliminated uncertainty the way other men eliminated weeds. Yet he watched me flinch at the mention of one locked door, understood it had nothing to do with his hotels and everything to do with me, and simply let it stand. No leverage, no curiosity weaponized into pressure. That restraint did more damage to my defenses than any offer he had ever slid across my bar. One slow Tuesday, he stayed past the last table, and I asked the question Ruth had been begging me to ask for months. Why had a man with his life never married? He did not deflect, which surprised me. He said intimacy was the one negotiation where he could not control the terms, so he had declined to sit at the table. 40 years of empire, he said, and not one person who would notice if he skipped dinner. He said it like a fact. I heard a confession. By then, something had changed between us, and we both knew it. He still came on Tuesdays. We still argued, but the arguments had become the best hour of my week, and I hated myself a little for that. Because a voice in me kept insisting that a widow who laughs with another man 2 years after burying the town's favorite husband is betraying someone. I just could no longer remember who: Peter, the town, or the woman I used to be. In late January, the trap sprang, though not on me. Leonardo's hotel financing partners had run out of patience. The expansion wing was designed around my parcel, and they gave him a choice with a date on it: secure the Lantern Room property, one way or another, or redraw the entire wing at a cost that made even Rocco go quiet. Millions. I learned later that the partners assumed the outcome was a formality. Everyone assumes that about Leonardo. Rocco pushed hard. The Voss arrangement was still breathing somewhere in a drawer, and my balloon payment was still ticking toward spring. All Leonardo had to do was wait, or nudge, or simply let mathematics do what mathematics does. From a business standpoint, Rocco said, choosing anything else was malpractice. Leonardo listened to all of it standing at the window of his office, and then he made the decision that changed both our lives. He chose the redesign. He paid millions he did not have to pay, accepted months of delay, and redrew his own building around my little corner, like a river going around a stone it had decided not to move. And here is the part that undid me. He did not tell me. He claimed no credit and attached no strings. He removed the pressure before he knew whether I would ever give him anything at all. Rocco told me in March, in my own kitchen, in the tone of a man reporting that the sun had failed to rise. He spent millions, so he would not have to spend you, Rocco said, and he made me promise not to tell you, so consider that promise broken. Then he left me standing there, with a dish towel in my hands and a heart doing something it had not done in 2 years, choosing a direction. That night, after the last table paid and Ruth went home, I did the thing I had avoided for 730 days. I took the ring of keys off my belt, climbed the back stairs past the storage landing, and stood in front of Peter's door. My hand was steady. That surprised me. I had imagined shaking. Instead, I felt something close to relief, the way you feel stepping out of a shoe that has been too tight for years. The key turned on the first try. I want you to remember that, because I had told myself for 2 years that the lock would be stiff, that the room would resist me, that the universe would give me one last chance to walk away. The universe declined. The door swung open on oiled hinges, and the smell of Peter's pipe tobacco, long dead but somehow still in the curtains, reached out and took me gently by the throat. His desk stood by the window, reading glasses on a closed ledger, a jacket over the chair I had never put away, 2 years of dust lying over everything like a first snowfall. I did not cry. I had done my crying the winter he died, alone in this same hallway, with my forehead against this same door. I crossed the room, opened the bottom left drawer, the one I had locked last, and took out the flat envelope I had been avoiding since the funeral. Inside was a separation agreement. Signed by Peter, signed by me, dated the night before he died. Not a divorce filing, not yet, just the formal beginning we had both finally found the courage to start. It had never been filed with any court. The lawyer's copy went in the mail the morning Peter's heart stopped, and I called and halted it. A dead husband and a separation agreement tell 2 different stories. Only one of them lets a town keep its favorite romance. Beneath the agreement were 2 train tickets. Mine was one way, northbound, to my sister's place in Massachusetts. His was one way, southbound, to a small apartment he had quietly rented near his brother. Both were dated for the morning after we signed. We had sat in this very room, 2 people who still loved each other, and planned a kind and honest ending to our marriage. Then we went downstairs and had dinner, and Peter died before morning. I need you to hear this clearly, because the town never got to. Peter was a good man. Our marriage did not fail in anger or betrayal. It changed, the way rivers change, slowly and without malice, until what we had was deep affection and loyalty and a house full of habits, but not the thing we had promised each other we would never counterfeit. We loved each other enough to stop pretending. That was the whole scandal. That was my terrible secret. For 2 years, I had let everyone believe I was the heartbroken widow keeping a shrine. The truth was uglier and kinder at once. I was not keeping Peter's memory. I was hiding my own freedom. Admitting I had already chosen to leave before he died felt like confessing I had wished him gone. So I locked the truth in this room and wore his photograph downstairs like a passport, and I called it devotion. Every kind word about our perfect marriage felt like interest on a debt I never owed. The next morning I called Leonardo and asked him to come before opening, and when he arrived I did not say a word. I just led him up the back stairs, opened the door I had kept locked against the world, and stood aside. He took in the dust, the desk, the jacket, and then me, and he had the grace not to ask a single question. I handed him the envelope. Then I sat in Peter's chair for the first time in 2 years and watched him read. I had prepared for everything, for disgust, because I had played the grieving widow while holding a signed goodbye, for triumph, because my secret made me smaller and therefore easier to buy, for the careful exit of a man who suddenly saw complications instead of a prize. What I had not prepared for was silence, with no angle in it. He read both tickets twice and set the envelope down as if it were alive. He said one thing first, and I will carry it to my grave. He said, "The two of you loved each other enough to tell the truth. Most people never manage that once." Then he looked around that little room and said something I did not expect from any man, let alone him. He said Peter sounded like someone he would have liked. Not a rival to beat, not a fool who let me go. A man he would have liked and wished he could have met. Do you understand what he did there? He had every advantage in that moment. My guilt, my secret, my mortgage, all of it lying open on a dead man's desk. One small cruelty about Peter and I would have been his, ashamed and grateful and manageable. Instead, he refused to make my husband smaller so he could stand taller. He gave Peter his full size, and in doing it, he finally made the room safe for me. Something in me unlocked that had nothing to do with the door. I had spent 2 years believing that admitting the truth would cost me Peter, the town, and any right to a future. Instead, it cost me nothing but the lie. I sat there and cried, finally, not for the marriage that ended, but for the 2 extra years I had sentenced myself to serve in a prison whose door was never even locked. Before anything else, I told Ruth. We sat in 2 chairs on the empty dance floor, and I put the separation agreement in her hands. She read it twice, and then this woman, who had loved Peter for 32 years, did the last thing I expected. She squeezed my hand and said, "Oh, honey, you carried that alone?" 2 years, and we all just watched you carry it. I had braced for betrayal. What I got was heartbreak that I had not trusted her sooner. A week later, I took the partnership agreement home with a red pen, and I did something the old Joanna, the one from before Peter died, would have recognized. I negotiated, not because I doubted Leonardo anymore, but because a partnership that begins with one side speechless is not a partnership. It is a surrender with better furniture. I wrote in every protection I could think of, and then I wrote in the ones I could barely think of. Ownership of the lantern room stays mine, now and after any transfer, with no forced sale option, ever. The name stays. Independent management stays. Every current staff member keeps their job, and Friday senior swing night can never be displaced by a hotel event, not for a wedding, not for a convention, not for a king. Revenue from the partnership gets divided under transparent reporting we both audit, and neither side may ever use my mortgage as collateral for the other's obligations. Leonardo read my additions in one sitting, initialed every page, and signed without changing a comma. Rocco looked physically ill. My lawyer, who had spent 30 years watching predators circle this neighborhood, read the final document twice and told me, in a wondering voice, that there was nothing left to warn me about. The only signature missing was mine. I put it there on a Tuesday, at the bar, between the lunch rush and the first seating. The upstairs office did not become Leonardo's room, and it did not become mine. We turned it into something better. Ruth and I spent a spring cleaning it out, and we filled it with 60 years of the Lantern Room. Photographs, programs, menus, recordings of the old bands, anniversary napkins with names faded to ghosts. An archive, we called it. The town's memory, finally allowed out of hiding. Peter's things are in there too, labeled in my own handwriting. His photograph still hangs by the bar. I want to be clear about that, because people assume moving forward means taking things down. It does not. I did not remove him to prove anything. He was 10 years of my life, and a good man, and the last honest conversation of his was with me, in that room, planning 2 separate trains. Remembering one life and choosing another are not opposites. That took me 2 years and 1 Italian hotel man to learn. If this story found something in you, if you have ever kept a door locked longer than you should have, then do me one small kindness before the ending. Tap like and subscribe, and share this with someone who needs permission to turn their own key. Now, Friday night. The band is warming up, the floor is filling, and you have waited long enough. Honestly, so have I. The first Friday after the signing, the band started at 8 sharp, and the floor filled the way it has for 60 years. The DeLuca sisters claimed their table. Mr. Kowalski raised his Manhattan to Peter's photograph, the way he has done every Friday since the funeral, and this time I raised mine too, without the old flinch. And in the doorway, precisely on time, stood Leonardo Grassi, in a dark suit, staying exactly 1 room away from the dance floor. Ruth found me at the bar, eyes bright with gossip 60 years in the making. "He has been taking lessons," she whispered. "Tuesday and Thursday mornings, in the hotel ballroom, with a dance instructor from Hartford and a signed confidentiality agreement." The instructor told her sister, who told her hairdresser, who told Ruth, which in this town is practically a press release. The man who once hid in my kitchen had been practicing for months, for this, for me. So I did what the whole story had been quietly teaching me to do. I crossed my own dance floor, past 3 generations of people who thought they knew my story, and I stopped in front of the most feared man in New Haven. I held out my hand. This time, I was the one making the offer. "Joanna Reed," he said, and there was a warning in it, because everyone was watching. "I know," I said. "Dance with me anyway." And for the second time in our strange story, Leonardo Grassi smiled. Not the surprised smile from the night I refused him. This one was quiet and certain, and entirely mine. He took my hand, led me onto the floor, and he knew the steps. Of course he knew the steps. We danced 1 full song, badly at first and then better, while the whole room pretended not to watch, and Peter's photograph watched over all of it from the wall. He never asked me to declare anything, and he never proposed, and I have come to love him for exactly that patience. He waits. Some Tuesdays I still catch him looking at me like a puzzle he cannot buy the answer to, and now I just smile, because he is right. I buried 1 husband already, a good man, honestly and with love. Whatever this becomes, I am not burying anything anymore. I am choosing it, out loud, with the whole town watching.